Welcome back to the swamp, my friends, and welcome if you're new. Today I have a handful of brand new scary stories that'll freak you out tonight that you most likely haven't heard before. As always, if you have a story that you would like to share in a future episode, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. You can also submit them at r/thedarkswamp on Reddit. I would love to potentially share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this show going on a daily basis. Now, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and get ready for these creepy and downright strange horror stories that'll freak you out tonight. Never Go Geocaching in the Woods by Julius C. I've been a geocacher for over a decade. For those who don't know, geocaching is a real-world outdoor treasure hunting game using GPS-enabled devices. Participants navigate to a specific set of GPS coordinates and then attempt to find the geocache or the container hidden at the location. The thrill of the hunt, the joy of discovering something hidden in plain sight, and the camaraderie of fellow enthusiasts have kept me hooked. I lead a small group of professional geocachers. We're known for tackling the most challenging hides that stump even the most seasoned of pros. Our latest obsession was a hide called the Devil's Puzzle. It had a difficulty rating of 5 out of 5, the highest possible. No one had logged a find since it was rumored to have been put up 2 years ago, and the cache owner had long since vanished from the community. Rumor had it that the coordinates led to an area of the woods notorious for its dark history of devil worship and human sacrifice. It was a cold, gray morning when we set out. My team consisted of Jim, a tech wizard with an uncanny knack for decoding even the most cryptic of clues, Sarah, whose sharp eyes missed nothing, and Mark, a local history buff who often provided crucial context about the areas we explored. We were ready for whatever the Devil's Puzzle could throw at us. At least, we thought so. The first coordinates led us to the edge of a dense forest locally known as the Dark Woods. The stories about this place were the stuff of urban legend. In the 1800s, it was said to be the site of occult rituals and gruesome sacrifices. People claimed to have heard chanting and to see strange lights and stuff at night. As we approached, an uneasy feeling settled over us. The trees seemed to close in, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The cache description was vague but mentioned a series of waypoints, with each of the puzzles leading to the next. The first clue was carved into an old, crumbling stone inside the tree line. Jim took out his equipment and began scanning it, while Sarah and Mark searched the area for additional hints. The stone bore a series of numbers and symbols. After just a couple of minutes, Jim cracked the code, and we were off to the next waypoint. The deeper we ventured, the darker and colder it became. The trees grew denser, blocking out the sunlight. We reached the second waypoint, a small, dilapidated cabin. Inside, the smell of decay was overwhelming. In one corner, we found a rusted metal box containing old photographs and scraps of paper with more symbols. Mark recognized the symbols used in old occult practices, but their meaning eluded him. After hours of piecing together the clues, we deciphered the following coordinates. As we trekked further, we noticed a strange silence. There didn't seem to be any birds, no rustling of leaves, just an oppressive stillness that lurked around every nook and cranny. The air grew thick, making it hard to breathe. Finally, we arrived at an old stone altar covered in moss and ivy. It was eerily pristine compared to the surrounding decay. This was the final waypoint. There was a metal box on the altar, similar to the one in the cabin. It was locked, but Jim had come prepared. He quickly picked the lock and we opened it to find a single, yellowed piece of parchment. On it was a hand-drawn map leading to the final cache location, deep in the heart of the woods. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me as we followed the map. The path led us to a clearing at the center of which was a large stone circle similar to those used in ancient rituals. In the center of the circle was a wooden box intricately carved with strange symbols. We approached with caution, the air heavy with an unseen presence. When we opened the box, we found a small, leather-bound journal. As I flipped through its pages, my hands began to tremble. The journal detailed the activities of a cult that had once operated in these very woods. It spoke of summoning rituals, human sacrifices, and a guardian bound to protect the cache's secrets. The last entry was a warning.
Those who seek this treasure will find only death.
Suddenly, the air grew colder, and a low, guttural growl emanated from the darkness beyond the clearing. We froze. Sarah screamed as a shadowy figure emerged from the trees, its eyes glowing an unnatural red. We bolted, adrenaline fueling our escape. As we ran, I could hear them, whatever them were, crashing through the underbrush behind us, its growls getting louder. We stumbled back to the cabin, barricading ourselves inside. The journal mentioned a way to banish the guardian, a ritual involving fire, and the symbols we had seen. Desperation fueled our actions as we recreated the symbols around the cabin and set fire to the journal. The air filled with an ear-splitting screech, and the ground shook violently. Then, there was silence. We waited until dawn before daring to leave the cabin. The forest felt different, lighter somehow. We returned to civilization, our faces pale and our hearts heavy. The authorities dismissed our story as a collective hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion, but we knew the truth. The devil's puzzle had been solved, but at a significant cost. We vowed to never return to those woods, leaving the secrets of the past buried where they belonged. And though we continued to geocache, the thrill of the hunt was forever tainted by the memories of what we unleashed in those cursed woods. I searched for the missing 411 by Andrew J. They always say curiosity killed the cat, but no one mentions what happens when curiosity gets the best of a human. My name is Lucas, and my curiosity nearly killed me. Or perhaps something worse. I have always been fascinated by mysteries and eerie tales of the unexplained. I was hooked when I first stumbled upon the lore of the missing 411 cases. People disappearing without a trace in national parks, especially Yosemite, was the perfect blend of intrigue and terror for my taste. In the spring of 2023, I decided to dig deeper into these mysteries. With my hiking gear, a sturdy tent, and enough provisions to last at least a week, I uncovered the secrets hidden within Yosemite National Park. The park's beauty is unparalleled, but beneath its serene surface, I felt an unsettling tension that gnawed at my resolve. Day one of my expedition was rather uneventful. I set up camp near the base of El Capitan, marveling at the sheer rock face towering above me. That day passed with nothing but the sound of chirping birds and rustling leaves. However, as night fell, a heavy silence descended upon the forest. It was as if the entire park was holding its breath. Around midnight, I awoke to the faint sound of a child's laughter. The sound was distant, almost ethereal. My rational mind told me it was just the wind playing tricks, but a more profound, primal part of me knew much better than that. I sat up, listening intently. The laughter grew louder, then abruptly stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. I didn't sleep well that night at all, to say the least. The next day, I hiked more profoundly into the wilderness, determined to reach an area with the most disappearances. The deeper I went, the less the park resembled the idyllic place I had visited. The trees seemed older, more gnarled and twisted, as if shaped by unseen forces. The air felt thicker, charged with an inexplicable energy. Sometime around noon, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin, half hidden by the underbrush. My heart raced as I approached it, the door creaking ominously as I pushed it open. Inside the cabin, it was an absolute shambles, as if abandoned in a hurry. Dust covered the furniture, everything lay scattered about and old. It was rusted, the stove in the corner, looking like it hadn't been touched in many years. But what caught my eye the most was a diary lying on the table, its pages absolutely yellowed with age and grime. The diary belonged to somebody named Henry, who had written about his solo hike in Yosemite in the early 1980s. His entries started rather normal, detailing his love for nature and peace in the wilderness. But as the days went by, his entries grew darker. He spoke of strange lights in the woods, whispers that seemed to follow him, and shadows that moved independently. His final entry sent chills down my spine.
They're watching me. They know I can see them. I don't think I'll make it out. If anyone finds this, beware the shadows. They're not what they seem.
As I read those words, a cold dread washed over my body. I decided to leave the cabin and continue my hike, but a nagging fear had taken root. As the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees whispering secrets I couldn't quite understand. That night, I made camp near a small clearing. I was too unnerved to sleep, so I sat by the fire, clutching my flashlight. The forest around me was deathly quiet. The sound of the crackling fire was all I could hear. Around midnight, I heard it again. A child's laughter, closer this time though. My blood ran cold as I saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was a child, or at least, it looked like one. But there was something wrong, something off about its features. Its eyes were too large, reflecting the fire like a cat. It just watched me with this unsettling intensity. I called out to it, but it didn't respond. Instead, it turned and walked back into the forest, vanishing into the shadows. I didn't sleep at all that night. How could I? As dawn broke, I packed up, continued my hike, hoping to put as much distance between myself and that clearing as humanly possible. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape that feeling of being watched. On the fourth day, I reached a remote area called Tenaya Canyon, which locals called the Bermuda Triangle of Yosemite. The area had an eerie beauty, but was filled with foreboding. Too exhausted to go further, I set up camp by the river. As night fell, the atmosphere grew heavy with tension. I built a fire and sat close by it to feel safe, my flashlight within reach the entire time. Somewhere around midnight, if I had to guess, the forest came alive with strange noises. Whispers echoed through the trees, and shadowy figures darted just beyond the firelight. My heart pounded as I saw the child again, standing at the edge of the clearing. This time, I don't think it was alone. More figures emerged from the shadows, their eyes reflecting the firelight. They surrounded me, their whispers growing louder. Panic began to set in, and I grabbed my flashlight, shining at the figures. They recoiled but didn't disappear. Panic was still deep within my veins at this point. Their whispers filled my mind, incomprehensible, yet maddeningly persistent. Desperation took over, and I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I grabbed my backpack and sprinted into the forest, not caring where I was going or where I would end up. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more insistent. The forest seemed to twist and turn around me, the trees closing in. I stumbled over roots and branches, my heart pounding as I desperately tried to find my way out. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing and collapsed, gasping for breath. The whispers were finally gone, replaced by an eerie silence once more. I looked around, realizing I had no idea where the heck I was. My GPS was useless, showing only static. Exhausted and absolutely terrified to my core, I set up a makeshift camp and waited for dawn. I found my way back to a familiar trail when morning finally came, but the experience had shaken me so much that I didn't really think I was thinking right until I finally found civilization, the oppressive feeling gradually lifting as I neared the park's edge. Back in the safety of my home, I tried to make sense of what had happened. The diary of the child, the whispers all pointed to something beyond my understanding. I reported my experience to the park rangers, who dismissed it as stress and overactive imagination. But I know what I saw and I know how I felt. There is something strange in Yosemite National Park. Something that watches. Something that waits. The missing people, the unexplained disappearances, they're not just accidents. There's a presence in those woods. Something ancient and evil. So if you ever find yourself in Yosemite, be very wary of the shadows. They're not just the absence of light. There's something more that might swallow you whole. The Duende Living on My Street by Driver Appropriate 965. So this happened back in 2004 when my family and I moved from California to Mexico for personal reasons. We stayed in a house my parents have in the town that they're from. I lived in Mexico from 2004 to 2007 and experienced some paranormal things. This is one of those things. By this time, I had already been living in Mexico for a couple of months. I had just gotten close to my cousins and had started having sleepovers. When it was their turn to come over to my house, we used to sleep in the living room next to the stairs that went to the second floor, which was on hold while my dad saved enough money to renovate it. They had a long plastic skylight covering the top of the stairs, and right under it was where we used to set up the blankets to sleep. By this point, one of my cousins had already slept over a couple of times, and one morning, he asked me if we ever heard weird noises on the ceiling. I saw him asking me in a serious manner, so I asked him what he meant, and he was like, "Yeah, you guys don't hear like that tapping on the roof?" And I told him, "Oh, that's probably just birds tapping, you can see them during the day and stuff." They had the habit of landing on the skylight, so I did see birds up there from time to time, and we used to see their feet during the daytime. But that's when he said, No, I've seen the birds, but this is a different kind of tapping." So I again asked him what he meant. He once again told me, "Don't get scared, but I hear tiny shoes like if someone is running. It sounds exactly like walking thumps, but smaller and lighter." I saw him straight in the face and couldn't hold it. I tried to scare him and yelled, "Ah!" and he busted out laughing. But I was like, no way, man. He's got to be making this up. We'd been here for a while now, and we would have noticed anything like that. I was sure of it. I honestly believe in that type of stuff, but there's no way it's happening in my house, right? He had the idea to go up to the roof and see if we could spot anything, since it was only at night when we heard those thumps. I agreed, and we went to get a ladder and get up onto the roof. There was some dirt on the roof because the streets around us were dirt roads, and thanks to that, dirt got up there. I kid you not, we saw several small footsteps next to the skylight. I was excited, but also mortified at the same time. So I asked him if he was just messing with me. My cousin said, "How? If we've been inside the house the entire time, how could I be up here doing footprints?" And that honestly blew my mind. I put my hand next to the footprints, which were smaller than my pinky. It was about an inch long, maybe about half an inch wide, and it seemed like whatever it was doing circles around the skylight. I saw the footprints go up to the skylight and then walking away from it. But we could only follow the footprints on my roof because there wasn't sand everywhere, so we didn't know where it took off after it got off the roof. I just thought of this thing returning, and I just thought about how I was going to tell my mom, and when I did, she, of course, didn't believe us. I told her to go up there, look at the footprints for herself, but she said that she wasn't going to do that and was getting frustrated. We had a camera, but my parents always hid it from me, so I didn't run the chance of breaking it. I didn't have a phone with me or anything like that at the time. This was several years ago. I wanted to do something to set up some sort of surveillance to try to catch it on video, but I never really had the chance, and we moved back to the United States before I had the chance to. Honestly, eventually, my parents finished up the second floor, and we no longer heard those footsteps. It seemed like it just went away entirely. I did eventually run across stories of something called the Duende, and I do believe, after hearing all these things, that I may have experienced something like a Duende. Thanks for listening to these creepy and downright strange horror stories from the great outdoors that'll freak you out tonight. As always, if you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to slap that like button, silly, so it knows you mean business. The more likes this episode gets, the more YouTube promotes it in the algorithm, and that helps the swamp grow its ever-expanding waters. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode, as I upload them multiple times a week on all things natural and supernatural. If you're on the go but don't have YouTube Premium, but want to still download and listen to your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories no matter where you are, you can download them absolutely free from Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, and pretty much everywhere else you find your favorite podcast online. Thank you guys so much for supporting the swamp the way you do. I couldn't do this on a daily basis without you guys. If you have a story you'd like to share in a future episode, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. You can also submit them on Reddit at r/thedarkswamp. I'd love to potentially share your story in the future.